everybody. Super excited to be here. My name is Yen, again, co-founder of Kona. We're the well-being and burnout support platform for remote teams. And so this is a lot of what we talk about every single day and something that I'm personally really passionate about. So let's dive into my little Canva slides. Huge fan of Canva over here. Can everybody see this okay? And volume-wise, am I enunciating properly? Can everybody hear me okay? Fantastic. All right, so it looks like we're good to go. Let's dive in. Today we'll be talking about managing burnout for teams, specifically remote, distributed, and hybrid teams. And it's been a huge body of work that we've been studying since January 2020, and I'll get into that in just a second. I normally like to start out each workshop with just a quick check-in. As you start to understand the Kona app, you'll realize this is the bread and butter of what we do. Green, yellow, red check-ins are embedded throughout the entire product. And so if you're familiar with this practice or not familiar, completely fine. Green means great, yellow, okay, and red, terrible. So thank God we're using Zoom. You can use the little reactions there. But if you want to react with your little heart color, I'd love to see how folks are checking in today. And if you wanted to put into chat how you're feeling and why, you can totally do that too. Personally, I am feeling a bit fatigued. I haven't gotten as much sleep as I wanted this entire week, which I acknowledge is ironic given that I'm giving a well-being kind of workshop and stuff. Gotta work on it myself. But yeah, I'm just super excited to be here. So kind of that mixed feeling going on, probably a yellow line. Seeing a couple greens, a couple yellows here. And we just check the chat too. Oh, we got a red. Chet and I hope that your red turns to a yellow very soon and stuff, but thank you for your vulnerability and being open to sharing that. Really appreciate it. A few yellows here, so it seems kind of like a majority yellow day. Folks are in the kind of same boat as me. And yeah, I see a lot of vulnerability in this chat here. So just really appreciate everybody for showing up and creating a safe space. And yes, Michelle definitely can relate to that. Looking for a new opportunity is really hard, and you are definitely not alone there. There are a ton of people in the same boat. Awesome. I'll give it a quick other second in case somebody else wants to join or if there are other new faces. I see that other folks are joining in. If you're new to the group and stuff like that, we're just doing a quick little emotional check-in. So green is great, yellow okay, red terrible. However you're showing up today, would love to know what's going on. Okay, awesome. So thank you for doing that check-in with me. Let's do a little bit of background first. Who the heck am I? So my name is Yen. I'm proudly trans non-binary. I go with they, them pronouns, and I am the co-founder of Kona. I started this startup back at UCLA in 2019 with a few friends. It was truly a dorm room startup. We did not have any sort of office whatsoever. And we were all bonding over the fact that remote work sucked. We had just gotten out of our first internships, our first job opportunities, our first kind of experiences in the real world working. And it was very interesting to realize how isolated we felt, how kind of we had maybe adversarial relationships with our managers, or we just didn't really get the support we were looking for. And all of us really loved the flexibility, but we couldn't really figure out why it sucked so badly. And a lot of those squishy issues inspired a lot of the research we subsequently did. We talked to whoever would talk to us, and to date, we've interviewed over 1,000 remote managers. That makes up the majority of the kind of research and work that we're doing today. In particular, as we started learning about this concept, we also started to realize how much and how important mental health, well-being, and burnout were in particular for the kind of remote work and future of work conversation. And we also started getting a lot more open about our own experiences with these different topics. I'm a huge mental health advocate. I personally have been diagnosed with OCD and actively seek out therapy, and I'm a huge advocate for seeking out care when you do need it and stuff. But I also am somebody who suffers from burnout myself. And even most recently, this past summer, I burned out pretty hard. I was pushing myself doing a ton of different vacations, a ton of different projects. And I was honestly kind of embarrassed because I'm running this burnout prevention startup. And here I am burning the heck out. I was encouraged by my teammates to post about my story. So in October, I actually finally jotted down, reflected, and wrote about it. And I think a lot of that shame turned into this realization that the reason this is such an interesting problem to solve is that even the burnout experts like myself actively struggle with it, and that there are a lot of different blockers, systemic factors that are actively causing us to burn out. So we're going to be addressing that today, but just know that if you are in the same boat or just curious about the burnout topic in general, if you've even come close to burning out at all in the past year or during the pandemic, because who hasn't, you're definitely not alone. And it's something that we can all kind of explore together during this session. So yeah. As I spoke to before, we've also done a lot of research on this topic. That 1,000 manager count is actively growing. Anybody from first-time managers to 10-year managers to people ops leaders and CXOs, we've talked to everybody who will talk to us to learn more about how burnout and mental health and also the remote work experience has actively changed throughout COVID-19. And we've learned a lot of different things, predominantly that the squishy problems, the kind of EQ, how to manage people, how to make sure that we build relationships and psychological safety, all these things that have nothing to do, they have everything to do, but also not directly to do with hard skills, performance management, feedback, the things we traditionally associate with management. Those squishier things are often the hardest things we struggle with. And more importantly, the biggest things that really affect employees day to day. So it's the entire focus of our startup, but it's also a huge focus of this kind of burnout research that we'll be talking about during this session. So I've been walking around the subject a lot. Let's go into the agenda itself. So first, you just heard the intro. Next, I'm going to go into Burnout 101. I saw a lot of questions at the beginning of this session about what burnout is, what causes it, how to understand it or recover from it. So we'll be starting to touch at least understanding and defining burnout in that section. And hopefully that'll inform a lot of the next kind of actionable steps that follow in the subsequent sections. We'll go over boundary setting and the importance of setting boundaries, what that means in a work setting, and how you can actively negotiate boundaries with the kind of nuance knowing that you're in a professional environment. And a lot of us are assigned female at birth in this chat room and often don't have as many privileges as perhaps a white cishet male. And so we do need to navigate a little bit more gingerly. Also talking about the people first manager position as well and how you can prioritize your people as a manager. And so we'll be diving definitely into that and the different types of things you can do specifically as a manager. Then open Q&A, and finally resources. We're looking at a session that'll probably end around 11. So just for pacing's sake, if you do need to ever like turn off your camera, go grab snacks or like water, breaks are welcome and I won't be offended. So just know that, yeah, that's available to you. So let's dive right into Burnout 101. And I normally like to start this with a quick little definition just so we can get on the same page of what the heck burnout is. So this is actually a quote from one of my favorite kind of executive coach friends. He has actively studied burnout for the last 25 years. And this is kind of a statement that he made to me during a conversation that I think sums it up really well. Burnout occurs when the demands of our day-to-day work or home experience chronically outstrips our capacity to meet those demands. I think there's a few keywords to kind of piece out here. There's not really stress being mentioned. Stress is often associated with burnout, but it's not the like key kind of thing. It's not the only factor that factors into actual burnout. Other words that I like to point out inside his definition, chronically, I think it's really important to know that this is something that happens over a long period of time and is continuous and hard to kind of pinpoint. It's not a one ad hoc bad day. And also capacity, the fact that burnout is really dependent on the person's capacity. It's not the fact that it's a stressful environment that perhaps is stressful for everybody or shouldn't be stressful for that one person. That person is actively feeling stress, then they will burn out. And what stresses us out is different per person. So just a few like kind of nuanced views. The executive coach I mentioned is Matthew Cook. You can find him on LinkedIn and he's like a delight to work with. He's just really awesome. So let's dive into this section. It's really important, and I think these stats speak to it, that burnout affects everyone and it's more rampant than ever, especially in 2023. In our own research, we've discovered that 63% of managers that we talk to, mind you, we've talked to 1,000 managers, experienced burnout during the pandemic. I would argue the pandemic is still actively going. This number is staggering. If more than half of managers are actively burning out, that means a lot of trouble for teams and the folks that they support. And as a matter of fact, a lot of exiting employees feel this kind of burn. 52% of exiting employees said their manager could have done something to support them better. So managers, unfortunately, are spread very, very thin. Employees see their managers as their first line of defense against any sort of issue. And when employees aren't getting support, the company pays the price often, and employees often have to leave their jobs or find support elsewhere, which just absolutely sucks. And I think the hopeful kind of stat is the last one. 62% of teams said that managers who actively discussed mental health, broke down the stigma, so to speak, would have helped them better address their own issues. So it's very clear where the path is. We just need to talk about this more, put a lot more effort, invest in our employees, but where to find the energy and how to make sure we can protect ourselves so we can protect our teammates is kind of the big question that we'll hopefully try to address here. So yes. Also, I want to do a quick check-in just because I did enter with quite a bit of nerves. Is the pacing okay? Are we still do I need to talk slower? Just a quick little check-in, and I'll check the chat as well. Okay, so far I'm getting thumbs up, so I will continue, but please don't be afraid to give me feedback as we're actively going, because yeah, I'd hate to realize at the end. Um, awesome. So clinically and also officially, what is burnout? I believe it was okay, now this is where I'm blanking, but a very official source basically quoted it down as having three different factors: emotional exhaustion, perceived inefficacy, and increased cynicism. The presence of all three factors is usually what deems it as burnout. It's not just being tired, it's not just being, I hate my job, kind of that kind of attitude. It's the presence of all three. And I think realizing the kind of nuance and intersection of all these three is where it really starts to get interesting. Emotional exhaustion, to define that, I think we can all relate to it. It's where you're not only physically exhausted, you do not have the emotional effort to think about your job, care about it, and really put forth the normal effort and amount of passion that you normally would have for this role. So emotional exhaustion is quite debilitating. It's a much more psychological stress in addition to the physical stress you may be feeling. And that's kind of the key one that oftentimes people experience when they're experiencing full onset burnout, et cetera. Perceived inefficacy, very big word, but a simple concept. The idea that you are not meeting your normal performance levels that you normally would achieve. The idea that you're suddenly bad at your job or that suddenly you can't do basic tasks, that's all titled under that kind of category of perceived inefficacy. And that third one, increased cynicism, that's where the pessimism and also often depression like symptoms kind of settle in. It's where you often don't have a belief in your own worth as a human being, unfortunately, or the worth of your job and the kind of impact that your job is having. That increased cynicism is really sinister and really starts to make it so folks, that's actually often why you hear folks quit their job, because not only are they so exhausted, but there's no hope left to continue pursuing this kind of route for them. So again, presence of all three factors, that's how we really define burnout and understand it. And yeah, Aaron, I see your comment there. Perceived inefficacy hits home for me the most too, because when I am burnt out, I will often push past the emotional exhaustion point, but it's the point with which I am like, I suck at everything. That makes me really start to realize maybe I am burning out. Maybe that's what's going on here. So I think it's also really important to stress that burnout has a lot of physical consequences and that we're not just talking about something psychological. It starts to really dip into our bodies. So some of the symptoms that I've listed here are very common. You may experience alternate symptoms. Everybody's body is different. I'm seeing chronic fatigue or insomnia, the inability to sleep, or the inability to not feel tired. That's often very common, and stress will often disrupt our sleep cycles. A loss of appetite or binge eating is oftentimes a response to stress as well. It really depends on how you operate and stuff, but that kind of strain will put a lot of stress on your stomach in particular, making it very hard to digest. You may have indigestion, chronic stomach pain, all those different types of issues are key signals that something's going awry. More frequent short-term illness, the idea of constantly getting cold every single time. Maybe you got the cold 3 times during a cold season. That's not okay. And that's often as a result of your immune system being under strain. And long-term health conditions such as migraines, any sort of like seizures at times, people can experience some pretty adverse effects due to high stress. I want to actually say that the silver lining to all of this is that our bodies are often our first alarm system to any sort of stress or things going wrong. We will normalize stress over time. We'll actually start to build up defenses and start to have a larger capacity for maintaining stress, but our bodies will often still retain the original amount of stress that we could have. So your body stores a lot of that strain. If you're noticing some things happening, it's a good early signal to help you catch burnout before it's too late. And yeah, acid reflux. I'm seeing, yes, the mind body connection is very important. I'm trying to check the chat as we're going and stuff. But yes. Okay, cool. What causes burnout? I heard this question, I think, earlier in the chat today. It's really important to know that there are a variety of factors, and I'll speak to the ones listed here and then speak a little bit more towards the research and things that we've read out in the ethosphere and stuff. So, what causes burnout? In different managers, I don't really assume that there are that many of those here. If you're actively going to the summit, actively sitting through the session, I'm not sure if you really need to worry about not caring enough. But we have all had bad bosses and bad experiences with leaders, I'm sure. And so that indifferent manager, the manager that makes you hate going to work, that's easily going to cause some burnout there. Limited PTO options. I think it's almost a misnomer, and I kind of want to change the label of that because unlimited PTO can also be a cause of burnout. The feeling that you have the offering of unlimited PTO, but that your work environment simply does not allow you to take any sort of break, that's where we really start to run into trouble. It's the kind of dissonance between what a culture offers and what you're actually able to utilize. So, limited PTO, I want to list that there. Mental health stigma. This seeps into every aspect of school, work, at home, with our friends. The inability to talk about mental health, what we're struggling with immediately when we're struggling, is a huge factor and often causes a lot of folks to not mention that they're burning out or mention that they're struggling to their manager, but also not be able to seek care and seek systems of care as a result. So, mental health stigma, huge thing. Hate that. Other things, poor boundaries. That's something that we are often all responsible for, but it's not like we actually learn what boundaries are in school. We learn about the mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, but we don't actually learn how to set boundaries for ourselves or how to actually make sure that we outline ourselves properly. And so oftentimes we're taught and rewarded by having poor boundaries. We're taught that we will succeed in work if we push on ourselves a little bit harder or sacrifice this or that. We're not taught that if you have great boundaries, you're actually preserving yourself long term. And a lack of appreciation, I think all of us can relate to this in some shape or form, whether it's at home, with friends, with your work coworkers, etc. If you're not feeling appreciated for whatever reason, particularly in your own love language too, it can make it very hard to feel like you're actually having an impact and having the kinds of impact on the people around you. So all these different things cause burnout. And the only other caveat I'll add is that there's three layers to this. So if this almost establishes kind of a baseline, think of it almost as a pyramid building upwards. There's the I factor of the individual kind of contributors, things within yourself. I would have categorized that as poor boundaries, the ability to kind of understand your own limits, pushing yourself against those limits, etc. There's the we factor, your team. So that's where poor and different managers, difficult teammates, inaccurate communication, poor collaboration, all that inside the team aspect is very much things that factor into burnout. And finally, there is the systemic kind of section where that's entire factors such as the laziness lie, kind of factors of capitalism, large processes that reward us for continuously burning ourselves out that maybe we aren't completely aware of, but that we're all kind of swimming in simultaneously. So know that there are a lot. I could do a whole presentation on this, but we need to continue on. But those are just some of the factors that cause burnout. So this is a workshop. I want it to be interactive. And so I added a bunch of kind of participatory elements so you don't just hear me talking at you for a whole hour. This is a quick self check-in. I wanted to, now that you understand the kind of definition of burnout, I figured we'd all should check in on the last 6 months that we've been experiencing so far. I added a few questions. Huge caveat, I am not a registered therapist. I do not have any of those qualifications. This is not meant to actually diagnose anybody with anything. But I do think that it's really good for kind of a self-awareness check-in. So if you could with me, and this does not need to be shared in the chat if you don't feel comfortable, but take your phone, take something that you can kind of write down and just answer these questions. How often did you feel in the last 6 months run down and drained of emotional and physical energy, like you're underachieving, unable to accomplish all the work you're assigned, misunderstood or underappreciated by coworkers, or persistent negative or hopeless thoughts about your job? So we'll just take, I think I'll put down 2 minutes for this little exercise here. So, and hopefully we're wrapping up a few of our check-ins. I believe these slides can be sent to you afterwards too. So if you wanted to revisit this after the session, you're not in the headspace to do this just yet, completely okay. There's some big ones. Yeah, definitely a little bit more. Each one could require 2 minutes if you gave it. So, although this is not an official diagnosis, if you did start feeling yourself tilting towards those three kind of big categorizations of burnout, just know that you may be on the path towards burnout and that could be something to check in with yourself on. We'll go over some tools to kind of help address that and to understand how to get some progress made towards the healing process of this as well. Awesome. So, let's move on. This next section is kind of the action section, the kind of how can we start to combat burnout section. The big title is boundary setting. There are multiple different strategies that you can use, but I think this one is the most effective. And there'll be some things that we can talk about specifically around self care and taking care of yourself inside this section as well. So, again, let's start with another definition: boundaries. Boundaries are the limits and rules of what is acceptable and healthy for an individual. I think it's especially important to define boundaries because oftentimes that word is used all across TikTok, therapy TikTok, folks giving free advice, etc. But it's also something that we is often misunderstood. We can misunderstand boundaries as a stern line in the sand, the kind of ultimatum that you either obey this or you're not my friend, or you obey this or I'm not going to talk to you, etc. We can misunderstand boundaries as something that is super black and white when really it's something that is truly just what do I need as a human being. The way that my therapist likes to put it is a boundary is the limit with which I can love you at the most and you can love me at the most, and we can both show up for each other without resenting one another. So if we can understand it as kind of the limit of ourselves and our abilities without resentment, then I think that's really important. So I think it can be really helpful in an assessment of how your boundary setting performance has been so far to understand what good and bad boundaries look like. And so I put in a couple like list items here. Obviously, not all of us are shift workers or kind of things, but try to stretch the definitions in a way that kind of fits your lifestyle. So I think the first one is kind of unpaid overtime. Any sort of overtime, I think, is the key word there. If you are working way past your typical work hours, if you're constantly pulling that late night at the office or virtual office, that is a good kind of early signal that maybe boundaries are a little bit off, specifically when it comes to work. An additional thing, having Slack on your phone, constantly checking Slack, opening it up almost as much as you open Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, that can be also another sign that maybe you're not able to really turn work off when work needs to be turned off. Saying yes to everything, agreeing to every single new project, every single new task, throwing everything on your list before you even read what's already on the list. That can also be a good signal. And finally, worrying while you're on time off. And I think I'm very guilty of this, having some sort of weekend or some sort of extended PTO where I've mentally brought work with me and I'm having active conference meetings that are very, very important with just myself and the ceiling of my bedroom and just trying to really work that through in my head. So those are some examples of bad boundaries, some examples of good boundaries. Clocking out. So in a remote sense, it's really important if you can to leave your laptop somewhere and to be in a different area. We're actively taking meetings in our kitchen, so it's not enough to leave the room, and there might not even be a room to leave anymore. However, we do need to sign out of Slack or at least turn things off. I personally don't have Slack on my phone. That's a personal rule for me, so I can actually truly clock out. Having a life outside of work, having hobbies, having friends, having like partners, etc. All that's really important to also make sure that you have a very rich outside of work experience and that your life is not so revolved around work that if something goes wrong in work, that's the only thing that you can really fixate on. Having a realistic workload, the opposite of saying yes to everything, knowing your limits, knowing how many hours you truly put in per week, what is the most like highest priority, all that kind of there's so many different systems that like for quadrant, I think somebody know probably here knows what I'm talking about and stuff, but having a realistic workload that you can actively prioritize is really important. And finally, rest, being truly restful. And if you really like the love language kind of thing, I will also add a little tidbit to your overall repertoire. There are multiple kinds of rest that we need to be prioritizing. It's not just sleep. We need to prioritize not having to be responsible for caretaking when we can swing it, being able to rest by being able to take naps or breaks from the different spaces, being able to leave and take vacation to physically change our situated cognition, all those types of rests. I have a whole list that I can send you, but that's also stuff that we need to check off and accommodate for. So, oh, I just want to let me just double check. Okay, I think we're doing good on the chat. This is our next exercise, and it'll be another kind of fun participatory exercise. This is something that you probably want to hold on to. So, if you do write it on a post it note, just make sure you don't somehow flush it down the toilet. But this is your well being cheat sheet. Essentially, it is your guide for 2023 on how to take care of yourself. I think it can be really daunting to hear the word self care and be like, okay, bubble bath, how? I don't own a bathtub. And champagne, no, I don't really feel like drinking and stuff. There are much more complicated and nuanced ways of taking care of ourselves. So we can write that out by using this well-being cheat sheet. I've broken out into 6 different sections. We're going to go by through each section and answer it one by one. And this will define the kind of boundaries that we need later on. So this is something that I would like folks to share. After we kind of complete this exercise, I'll put on 5 minutes on the timer, but you can just pick a category and write yours when you're finished into the meeting chat, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to set 5 minutes right now. We'll all participate together and excited to see what people put. We have just over a minute here on the timer. So if you have one section, feel free to wrap it up, or maybe invest in two sections. And if you haven't yet, feel free to chat it out. I've already seen some awesome answers, which oatmeal with nuts and a Mediterranean salad are already like I should add that to today's list of foods to Grubhub because that sounds fantastic. And the long dog walks that I saw, that sounds so lovely. I'm house sitting my parents' dog, and having a dog is such a good reason to go outside. All right, we have about 10 seconds. AJ, I'm gonna put you on the spot really quick and actually answer your question live here. So, I actually personally have tried this thing, which I really love, of like a no phone day. I'll actually lock up my phone in some sort of safe and then just operate without my phone. And it's amazing how I need a watch. I actually had to buy a watch because I discovered how often I use my phone as my watch. But besides that, it was fine. I went to brunch, I went to cafes, and I actually started paying attention to trees and other things. That is my scheduled disconnect time. It's a bit extreme, but you can have different types of self care things like that. And it really helps you basically deactivate your brain, shut down those tabs in there, and just kind of reset in a lot of ways. So, whatever you need, it's up to you. But just know that disconnect time is just as important as social time. So, as folks have already started to understand and figure out, this is going to be a guideline. I actually like it better than a New Year's resolution to take care of yourself in an active way. And these are all different micro habits that you need to build over time. It's not going to be easy and it's going to take a lot of little shifts and decisions to be made. But as you start to build a habit, self care will become a normal thing that you do rather than this kind of treat yourself kind of moment that happens maybe once in a blue moon. So this well-being cheat sheet, please save it, use it. It's not, I didn't come up with it. It's actually another kind of thing borrowed from a different executive coach, Robin Ward of LA. She's one of the best executive coaches out there for tech and stuff. It's just a really good little guide. So let's move on to the next section. This is where we start to enforce the kind of less fun aspect of saying no to things and setting boundaries depending on what we just saw on that well-being cheat sheet. This is particularly important for work or certain demands that put pressure on our well-being and force us to sometimes make compromises that after making that compromise, we're not always happy about. So this power of no exercise, I wanted to give three different examples here based off of kind of items that have previously been shared during well-being cheat sheets to kind of demonstrate how you might navigate the boundary setting conversation there. So let's just say that you often, this is a very fancy lunch, but let's just say that your one boundary for food in particular is not to work during your lunch period and to take lunch away from your desk, actually at a table, sit down with a nice meal and actually eat something. As somebody who forgets lunch a lot, I know that that's really important for me personally. And it's going to require, however, that you don't take a meeting or have anything scheduled at that time, and that you don't check Slack at that time as well, or whatever, Microsoft Teams, etc. So, a boundary that you will set for yourself, perhaps in this example, is that I'm going to make sure that my lunch periods are 30 minutes of unsustained me time where I can eat food. And that means turning off my phone if Slack is on my phone, shutting down my laptop for just a 30-minute period, marking myself as away, making sure that I put a hold on my calendar at a consistent scheduled time so I know that that is lunchtime, and making it so it's not free so folks don't book over it. These different types of decisions can make it so you can actually enable yourself to have a lunch period that's uninterrupted. Number two, let's just say you want to take a week-long trip once a year, twice a year, and that is a priority for you to travel the world and that you want to see more stuff. especially working remotely, it's very deceptive. Oftentimes folks are able to not really travel without bringing work. So let's just say this is a non-work trip. For this is going to require a bit of planning. You're going to need to set a kind of scheduled, this is my work trip kind of thing on your kind of vacation calendar for your employer, or request PTO in some way. But you're also going to need to make sure that leading up to that vacation, folks aren't trying to throw projects on you or throw some sort of last minute meeting that needs to be taken in for like 9 p.m. European time to make accommodations for folks on PST. You really need to make sure that whatever is that dedicated PTO slot of yours is preserved and treated as sacred. And those are different conversations that you'll need to have with many stakeholders to make sure that that is preserved for you. The last one, and I saw a lot of comments about exercise here. I saw somebody who wants to exercise 6 days a week. That is fantastic. It also means time in the calendar that we need to schedule out. And so moving and setting aside time, whether you're a morning runner, afternoon runner, let's just say, making sure you set aside time that is your sacred running block, that you're not taking meetings while sprinting down the kind of trail path, and that you actively have this time set aside for yourself is really important, requires some conversations, etc. And a conversation like that could sound something like, hey, this is my time for running. If you need me, I'll be back in X amount of time. You can reach X person to kind of answer any immediate questions. I'll be right back. And maybe even setting up kind of asynchronous practices to help out with that. I do want to check the chat here just to make sure that I'm fielding questions. Anastasia, you mentioned, how do parents save lunch? That I'm 23 years old, so I'm probably the least qualified person to answer this question, but I do think and trust that there are some parents in the chat that can help. I do think that when it comes to saving a lunch period, actually, I'm not even gonna, I'd love for parents to help answer Anastasia's question in the chat, because I can answer what I would think, but it's probably gonna be terribly inaccurate. So yeah, let's go help her out inside the chat there. This is probably the least fun but most important aspect of just maintaining your own well-being. It's one thing to list out the well-being cheat sheet. It's much harder to enforce it. And teaching our teammates on how to treat us, teaching our teammates what is and isn't allowed according to our boundaries, is the important part of this entire exercise. It will require multiple conversations, most likely. So I do want to caveat that there are a bunch of other self-care things. It's really dependent on the person, and so we can tackle more of that in the Q&A section. I do want to go into the specific kind of general people first manager category to talk about leadership practices that we've seen across all these 1,000 managers that really have led to well-being first workplaces, people first workplaces, and workplace environments that employees really love and thrive in, so we can protect their well-being as well as protect ours. So moving on to this next section, another definition for you: people first manager. It's a leader that prioritizes the needs and well-being of their most important asset, their people. So really important, and also one of our favorite philosophies, because we truly believe that people first managers are the best kinds of managers out there. Outside, in addition to workplace objectives, they're there for the people. They're there to make sure that their people are taken care of. So let's go into how that works. I think first, stressing the importance of this is really, really key. It's important to know that 95% of people who often take time off of work due to stress or anxiety didn't tell their manager the real reason. If that is already fact, then it's more important than ever to create environments where we can challenge and start to make this less of the norm. If we can create psychologically safe environments where employees feel safe to speak up when something's going wrong, to share ideas that may be in opposition to the norm, then we can actually allow for folks to take care, seek care, and get resources that they need from us, folks who often are a little bit more well-connected in the company. So it's really important to make sure that we build these environments. That's the whole reason why people first managers, I believe, are some of the best kinds of managers out there, in order to protect people and their well-being overall. And I didn't add a definition slide here, but if you do know what psychological safety is, please raise your hand. If you don't feel left out. Again, it's this basically term that was coined by Amy Edmondson in her research with, actually, I believe it started with nurses, but it's been applied to like everywhere. Psychological safety is this one kind of key X factor. When employees feel that they can bring up opinions that are in opposition to the norm or challenging certain things, unsafe opinions sometimes, when they feel safe to do so, you have huge improvements on engagement, creativity, collaboration, overall kind of I'm already blanking, but it really helps with the workplace environment when you can create that environment and it is impacted by investments in trust, investments in kind of that manager employee relationship, and investments in kind of the team as a whole. So, yes. I wanted to add in a little bit of a spin with our own research. So we know, thanks to Amy Edmondson and her fantastic body of work, that psychological safety is really important. With our research, we actually learned how difficult it is to create psychological safety in a remote environment. If you're staring at all the kind of faces on this little Zoom screen, you know that we are 2-inch faces on a screen. It's very difficult to build relationships in that kind of environment. So at the same time, while strong relationships are the backbone of remote relationships and environments, we need to trust folks in order to operate and lead them effectively. We also struggle the most in remote environments to build those relationships in the first place, leading to this kind of paradox. It's a lose-lose situation. We call it the remote work paradox, essentially, because trust is so important, yet so hard to build. So the people first manager philosophy attempts to challenge that, and it basically places us in a very keen position to work with that. People first leadership traits include compassion, transparency, and a coach mindset. I feel like based off of the answers in this chat, I've already seen a lot of folks exhibiting these characteristics, but essentially caring about your people, being transparent about the decisions that you make, and looking to improve folks over time and really improve that person's skill set, their ability to achieve, and really shape their career. So overall, and I just want to keep an eye on time because I definitely have not allotted the perfect 15 minutes for Q&A. So we do want to make sure and know that well-being is a value that we can actually prioritize in each one of these different types of manager traits, habits, decisions, basically. So for meetings, oftentimes, if you're a meeting first culture, you're definitely not the only one. The accommodations made by transitioning to remote, folks really over index on meetings. We started to see all sorts of different impacts on Zoom fatigue and kind of camera on versus camera off. It's really important to be aware of whether or not your meetings are necessary and whether or not they are like benefiting the end user, the people that are sitting in the meeting itself. Sending out agendas, being able to be asynchronous friendly, and offering a ton of support in one-on-ones, creating safe environments for employees to bring up whatever they need to bring up. That's some of the ways you can prioritize well-being as you're leading through these different meetings. PTO policy, your company will say one thing, but how you lead your team is really going to be how they experience their PTO policy. So if you're actively encouraging your teammates to take PTO, to really take time off when they need it, to see a sick day as more than just actively like in the hospital, but also when you are throwing up because of food poisoning, your attitudes towards PTO and how you demonstrate taking PTO is really going to affect the way that your teammates see it as well. Finally, expectation setting, being able to kind of set expectations, communicate, avoid stressful miscommunication, and really communicate effectively of painting done, as Brene Brown likes to say it, exhibiting exactly what you're expecting from your employees already takes a huge load of stress off them. And team bonding. I already talked a lot about psychological safety. Another way we can build trust in remote environments is to invest in those little, not just workplace happy hours, but all those tiny moments of team bonding. Part of the way we've designed Kona is to add like an asynchronous team bonding element. And it's really important for that kind of daily touch point to exist for remote teams to feel close and able to share with one another. So if you take nothing else away from this conversation, just know this question: how are you? That's both you being yourself and you being your teammates. Really asking how you're feeling, checking in with yourself and your teammates is one of the most important ways you can, what important tasks that you can do and tools that you can have to combat burnout over time, get ahead of it and make sure that you're addressing these different things. So I wanted to leave time for an open Q&A. And I can already expect one of the questions before I get it and stuff to be, what do I do if I'm already burning out and how do I actively take care of myself? Clinically, overall, they often say that it can take up to 6 months to recover from burnout, which is really bad news when 6 months is like a literal lifetime of a business. So really look towards just working and investing in that well-being cheat sheet and making tiny wins possible. Do something of a self-care routine, start to build that routine, build that over time, build periods of rest. And over time, you're going to start closing those stress cycles that are continuing running that are feeding into more burnout, and you'll start moving yourself in the other direction. And that's one way you can start healing yourself. But team bonding ideas, I have a ton of them. I can definitely send actually a longer list of like team bonding ideas. Kona is one of them. We have like it's more than just Among Us and games. I have like a huge list that I can kind of get into later for you, Michelle. But okay, please let me know what questions you have.
And that
Yeah,
was amazing. I think we had some questions earlier on in the chat, and we
amazing.
touched on a lot of them. I think you remembered it from last time, but how is it not my own professional responsibility to manage burnout, but my managers and my team? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So just to make sure that I understand the question correctly and stuff, it's basically how is it basically to manage both my own burnout and also my team's burnout kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a shared responsibility of burnout throughout the organization. You touched a bit
Yeah,
on that, but how I think, uh, Hannah, I think you asked this question, but I feel as though the question is pointing to how do I ask for
Yes.
help and how do I get support to manage my burnout once I've identified it.
yeah.
I guess,
Yeah, that's
So
kind of that's
please.
sorry. I'm just from speaking from personal experience. I had like two managers at one point last year, and I went to them and I said, "Hey, I have burnout." And one of them was like, "Well, are you doing self-care? Are you, are you exercising? Do you have a therapist?" And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this is how, like, when does the personal responsibility end of like, okay, I'm trying to do as much as I can, but I'm still feeling burnt out, and the professional like responsibility starts? Whereas, like, for example, I had another manager. The other manager was like, burnout is trauma. Let's try to reduce your trauma in a workplace setting. Let's try to realign expectations. Let's try to give you things that are going to be low hanging fruit that will make you feel accomplished. So, like, that discussion with my manager was like, with that second manager, was way more fruitful and lending towards like healing my burnout than like, here's some self care tips. So
Yeah.
like, I'm wondering, like, how can we encourage more of that, of like, burnout and self-care is not my own responsibility, but it's the responsibility of my manager and my team.
Yeah, I think that is an excellent question. Thank you for being open about your personal experiences as well. I think that's where the kind of, and this unfortunately wasn't in the slides, and I'll make a note for next time I do a presentation like this, but the three different tiers of burnout and the different tiers of responsibility, so to speak, is really important to mention. So that I section, the kind of like, what can I do with self-care, was I believe what the former manager was trying to get at, that you need to take action to solve your own burnout. But I think it fails to factor in the other two factors of the company or your team, immediate team, and then the overall systemic factors that are at play. So the team aspect, that's kind of what the latter manager was talking about, the different things the team could do to reduce the different types of ways that the team is not showing up for you that's actively contributing to burnout. And oftentimes, if there is some sort of, I mean, I live in America, if there's some sort of shooting or some sort of news thing, the announcement about Roe v. Wade, any sort of thing that happens like that, that's going to affect certain minorities differently. And acknowledging that too is really important. Unfortunately, managers are not trained whatsoever about these things oftentimes. And so it's really their own personal experience and their own kind of awareness that you're kind of facing the brunt of, which is why you had two very, very different experiences there. I think the only last thing I'll say, I know I'm rambling, but if we can ask for what we need, if we can ask, what is it, is there something that the team could do to help me with this thing? That small question could point potentially your manager in the right direction if they are caring enough to kind of ask and help you out with this.
absolutely, that was awesome. So I know Yen, I know you have another engagement you have to run to, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much for,
Yeah,
yeah.
I can answer one or two more questions. I'm really enjoying it. I feel bad that I talked so much that I didn't give enough time for Q&As.
It's great. So there are a couple questions here. I think you touched on most of them. How do you recognize burnout before you burn everything down? I think they gave us a lot of tips for managing it, getting ahead of it, but recognizing it. Do you have anything else to say
I
about
think
that?
Yeah, I think just part of the recognition, and this is really challenging because it's really touching on that EQ pillar of self-awareness, but really trying to figure out what are my early alarm bells and signals. And it's really interesting, you can look into this, but look into stress styles as well. So I've worked out with my co-founders exactly what our three different stress styles are, and we all have different ones. I'm withdrawal. When I get stressed, I run away from problems. My other co-founder is attack. When he gets stressed, he will actively attack us too. And the other one is defense. He will oftentimes like get really defensive and protective over what is his kind of thing. So knowing that mine is withdrawal, the moment I feel like I should run away to Idaho and start a farm, it's usually the moment that I need to work on my burnout and that something is going on. And if you start to see early signals, either in your body, a stomach ache, or some sort of behavioral shift, that's often an early signal. Take a step back, reinvest in that well-being cheat sheet, and see what you can do.
Amazing. We have another question here about how to balance the desire for high performance and not burning out. So any thoughts on that?
I could do a whole presentation about that. I really challenge you to read the Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devin Price. They are a fantastic author that's actively researched this. And I think that's going to answer the question much better than I can in this next 2 minutes. It's a whole book about the way that capitalism and different factors sets us up to work really hard and get like so many rewards for working hard that we completely obliterate anything that our own body needs in the process. That is The Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devin Price.
Amazing.
Yes.
Lots of books in the chat.
A lot of good Insta stuff too. Yeah.
Perfect. That's all the questions that we had in the chat. Feel free to unmute if you have any questions that come up to your mind right now. But other than that, thank you, Yen. This has been amazing, very helpful, and lots of notes taken on my side on how to manage burnout moving forward.
I'm so glad. I put a bunch of resources towards the end here that you can page through, but I do want to leave. Okay, this always happens to me where I like click that damn thing. I need to stop sharing. Okay, this is where I show off that I'm not truly a Gen Zer who knows technology. I'll just throw my email into the chat. If any of you have questions, please feel free to throw it over. We can hop on a quick little Zoom and chat about things. I'm really just passionate about this topic and really passionate about helping other assigned female at birth people with this stuff. So please reach out.